Hi BookTube, Amy. So I was a long time in finishing this novel, Little Men by Louisa Alcott. This is a used copy that my mom picked me up for Christmas because I told her I wanted to read Little Men since I was getting more into Louisa May Alcott, and I'd never read this one. So this is technically the sequel to Little Women and Good Wives. As you probably know, when we talk about Little Women in North America, we are talking about both Little Women and Good Wives because they're most commonly published in a single volume under the title Little Women. But as I understand it, elsewhere, such as in the United Kingdom, they are still published in the traditional 2 volumes. So that would technically make this the sequel to Good Wives rather than the sequel to Little Women. But that aside, so this book picks up a few short years after the end of Little Women. And Jo has married Professor Bear. She is referred most commonly in this book. She's referred to as Mrs. Bear, or oddly, sort of near the end, Mrs. Jo. It's actually kind of odd the way that switches because about for the first half she's Mrs. Bear and then suddenly she's Mrs. Jo, which is, it's a bit odd, but you just go with it because there are a few inconsistencies in this book. So Jo has married Professor Bear and they have opened a school for boys at Plumfield. Plumfield was the house owned by Aunt March, and Aunt March left it to Jo in her will when she died. And so Jo is married and they have this whole cast of children. There are about a dozen little boys. There's a couple of little girls. It's difficult to discern who is who. So you have Meg's children, who I think are there, and possibly Amy's children as well. Jo has a child of her own, and then there is an assortment of boys who have come from all over the place. And the novel opens with Nat, who is an orphan who loves to play music, and he has been brought to Plumfield to go to school there. And it's indicated that Laurie is the one who has sent Nat here, although we don't really discover how Laurie came to find Nat or who's paying for the schooling. And Laurie is a great benefactor for the school. He is giving them money and gifts and whatnot. And so that's the setting for this one. But unfortunately, I didn't enjoy it all that much. It's very episodic, and each story is very much geared towards children. You know, different games, getting lost when you go berry picking, getting a toy stove, running away from home, pillow fights, that sort of thing, dancing. And it started out really promising, but it's just not much of a narrative. As I said, it's very episodic, and so it's a little bit hard to stay interested in. I can see this as being something that would be perhaps enjoyable to read to a child at bedtime if you go chapter by chapter, but it doesn't quite have the charm of some of Alcott's other books. This copy has some quite nice illustrations. And there are some funny moments, like when Nat first arrives at Plumfield and he learns that they are all allowed to have a pillow fight one night of the week with the understanding that they will be good every other night of the week and go to bed on time. There are some interesting bits in here. So Louisa May Alcott and her father, Bronson Alcott, were very much into education and educational theory. And so at one point, Mr. and Mrs. Bear use one of these techniques that I think when Louisa and Bronson actually tested it in real life, it wasn't quite so effective as it is revealed to be in this book. So when one of the children misbehaves, they are told that they must never do it again, and if they do it again, their punishment will be to strike Mr. Bear. And so Nat has this quite tearful scene where he just can't bear because he's lied, he has a tendency to lie, and as punishment he has to slap Mr. Bear several times, and he doesn't want to do it, and he's quite repentant. And apparently that does the trick for all these children to prevent them from doing bad. They don't get punished, rather they are forced to strike somebody else, which I can't see that working out very well in real life. It's the whole idea that a child is not going to do wrong out of love for you. But of course, you know, children aren't exactly rational creatures, and I think as Louisa May Alcott found out in her own teaching, the kids don't care that much. If they don't care much about you as a teacher, and it's not much of a deterrent towards bad behavior. So I thought that was just interesting to come across, but overall not something I greatly enjoyed. There was one particular scene where I think it was the most emotional bit, probably the only bit where I was like, oh, that's the universe I'm still in. We are still in the Little Women universe, was when Jo was looking upon a sort of motherly little girl who is doing some mending in the corner, and she's listening attentively as somebody plays an instrument, and Jo looks at this little girl and reflects this girl reminds her very much of Beth. So there are some sweet moments, some interesting moments, but overall it's nowhere near as amazing as Little Women, and it's not even as good as some of Alcott's other novels like Work or Rose and Bloom, for instance. There are certainly other works by Louisa May Alcott that are better than this, but I guess as a follow-up for children from Little Women, perhaps they would appreciate this. And there's another image here of a kid on a horse. So yep, that was Little Men. I read that on Saturday. Yeah, I read it on Saturday. I finished that up finally. And then on Sunday, I decided to reread Pride and Prejudice. And now I'm not sure what I'm going to read because it's definitely going to be another night of reading here in my apartment.